The South African government is on high alert this afternoon, going as far as evacuating locals trapped in China as the coronavirus spreads to almost 50 countries across the world. 2 South Africans working on a Japanese cruise ship have tested positive for COVID-19. Global markets are now plunging to unprecedented levels. The threat to Africa growing by the minute, with Nigeria confirming its first case. Of course, we're all over this story on The Lead. Let's get the latest from Michael Apple, Rupio Madzena and Michael Marilia. Mike Apple, let's start with you. What do we know about the 2 South Africans who are confirmed to have contracted COVID-19?
So there were 12 South Africans working on board the Diamond Princess Japanese cruise liner. And there are 3,700 people on board that cruise liner, 705 confirmed cases, 2 South Africans. The other 10 are in the clear for the moment. They will undergo normal quarantine, 14-day quarantine process once all the passengers have been disembarked. But the South African Embassy is in contact with those 2 South Africans, and once they've gone through the treatment process, they are asymptomatic at the moment. They're not displaying any of the flu-like symptoms normally associated with COVID-19. Once they are well enough and are cleared of having that virus, they're going to be repatriated. Sean.
I see the coronavirus playing havoc with the markets, Rupio. Just how bad is it?
Very bad, Shahan. This is the biggest fall we've seen on global markets since the 2008 global financial crisis. We've seen around $5 trillion wiped off in value on global markets. And of course, it's had the same effect on the South African bourse, down over 4% in the afternoon trade. We're also seeing an impact by the rand. It's at its weakest levels in the last 4 years. So if you wanted to take a trip overseas, and this time you cannot because of what's happening, it would be impossible. But one positive about this, Shahan, is the fact that we are seeing the price of oil dropping to lows that we haven't seen in a long while, which means this could bode well for South African motorists who could look forward to a petrol price cut in the short term.
So let's bring in Mike Marilia now. Officials, of course, identified this virus less than 3 months ago. It's now on 6 continents, and it seems we've reached a crucial milestone.
Yeah, absolutely, Shahan. In fact, that milestone is being identified by the World Health Organization, saying that we've now reached a situation where there are more new infections outside of China than actually in China itself. Let's take a quick look at our world map, and we'll give you a sense of how this virus has actually spread and migrated to all these different countries. First, a quick wrap of the numbers. China sitting at nearly 80,000 infections. Remember, just over the course of 2 months or so, nearly 2,800 deaths recorded in that period, Shahan. And just to wrap up the rest of the world, it now has spread to 46 countries outside of China. Much less cases, 3,600 cases and 57 deaths. But the concern now is the number of new infections. And several countries around the world have registered their first infections over the past few days. Pakistan, for instance, Georgia in Eastern Europe. And what's crucial about these countries, Shahan, is that they're more remote parts of Europe. We saw a lot of infections in Western Europe. Now we're seeing countries like Romania, countries like Greece, even Northern Macedonia have been affected by this particular virus. And it's because we live in an interconnected world. Globalization is a massive force when it comes to these sorts of infections. As I mentioned, Estonia in Northern Europe, Denmark in Scandinavia, as well as Norway, countries which you would assume would be relatively safe from a global pandemic. I'm afraid to say that they've all registered infections. Also, South America registering its first infection, Brazil being the country there, Shahan. And on our own continent, another 2 infections, Nigeria as well as Algeria. We understand that Italian visitors are the victims in these particular cases. And of course, the local angle here, Shahan, in Japan, 2 South Africans confirmed with the virus. They were on that cruise ship which has encountered problems and has had to be quarantined. Shahan?
Yeah, so Mike Apple, do we have any details on the plans to repatriate the South Africans still actually trapped in Wuhan?
Well, Shahan, besides this statement that came out of the presidency yesterday saying that plans are now underway, in conjunction with the South African National Defence Force. This will be a military operation to bring those 132 of the estimated 200 South Africans who are there. Some of them have opted not to return home, but in conjunction with the Defence Force and bearing in mind the wishes of the families and the citizens impacted themselves who've been on lockdown for some time now. It must be a terrible situation. You're confined to the four walls of your little flat or house. You cannot go anywhere. Wuhan has turned into a veritable ghost town, very tough conditions. So 132 of them opting to come back. The when and where exactly they're going to be quarantined is the issue. I've heard of 2 locations in the Free State. Thaba Nchu is one, Phuthaditjhaba is the other. Any location is yet to be confirmed, but the Department of Health's Dr. Anban Pillay says that all precautions are going to be taken before these citizens are repatriated. Listen in.
Once they return to South Africa, they will be transferred directly to a quarantine facility with no contact with the public, so as to ensure that if any of them were infected during the period, that they remain within the quarantine area. And after the quarantine period has ended and they test negative, we will then be able to release them to go to their families.
So, Rupiwa, should we be worried about the major sell-off having an impact on unit trusts and pension funds?
Well, Shahan, the answer, if you think about the amount of billions, or trillions rather, that's been wiped off global markets, should be yes. But we do have fund managers who diversify unit trusts as well as pension funds. So what you'll see is that those that invest on the stock markets don't go heavy into that. In fact, almost 80% of all investments go into different avenues. So the portfolio is very diverse. And so if we are seeing an impact because of the sell-off that we've seen, it won't be as much as people would think. But Diaz Nesson there who breaks it down.
Most pension funds in the country actually have a low equity rating anyway. Yep. And that was because the returns expected from the South African equity market are not expected to outperform in the short term. So you'll find that most pension funds have between sort of 50 and 60% in equity. Yep. So the 10% drop that we've seen in the week has a much lower impact in your pension fund because of this diversity.
So, Mike Marilia, staying with the business side of things, China, of course, South Africa's biggest trading partner. What does that mean when it comes to the risk here at home?
Yeah, it's a crucial question, Sean, and we've actually got research from a group known as The Lancet. Let's take a look at that as we bring up the map of sub-Saharan Africa. So what The Lancet has done here, it's basically looked at airport traffic between some of the major countries in Africa and Chinese destinations. And what's interesting here, Shahan, is that a lot of Chinese visitors to South Africa come from an area known as Guangdong or the regions around Guangdong, and that has a high infection rate when it comes to the coronavirus. And so, as you see South Africa flashing there, it's got a relatively high import risk. In other words, a relatively high risk of importing the virus from a place like Guangdong. Also, Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria and Ethiopia, relatively high risk of importing the virus. That doesn't necessarily mean, Shahan, that officials aren't ready to deal with the virus if it arrives here. It's just the risk of actually bringing it to this country itself. So fingers crossed, if it does eventually arrive here, we'll know what to do about it.
Yeah,
Shahan?
Hopefully we are ready. Appreciate it, guys. Our reporters, Michael Apple, Michael Marilia and Rupiwa Madzena.